to say this before I lose the nerve, or before something changes again, and I convince myself it was nothing, because that's what I kept doing. For weeks, telling myself it was nothing. The truck comes at 2:47 a.m. every night. Same truck, same time, down to the second. And I know that sounds like something you'd brush off. Maybe it's a long-haul driver with a tight schedule. Maybe it's someone who lives down one of those dirt roads that branch off the highway like cracked veins. I told myself all of that. I held on to those explanations like a rope over a black pit. But ropes fray. And the pit doesn't care what you tell yourself. I should start at the beginning. I took the night shift at the Elroy fuel station because no one else would. That's the honest answer. The pay was barely above minimum. Next, the hours were 10 at night to 6 in the morning, and the location was the kind of place that made GPS systems give up. Highway 114, about 40 miles south of the nearest town worth naming. Nothing out there but flat land, dead grass, and the kind of darkness that feels like it has weight. The station sat on a cracked concrete pad with 2 pump islands, a small store with barred windows, and a neon sign that buzzed like a dying insect. Elroy's. Half the letters flickered. The E had been dead for months, so at night it just read Elroy's, which sounded like something you'd mutter in a fever dream. I didn't mind the isolation. That was the selling point, actually. I'd been through a bad stretch. Lost a lease, lost a relationship, lost the energy to pretend either of those things mattered more than they did. And I needed a job that would leave me alone, and this one delivered. Most nights I saw maybe 3 or 4 customers total. Truckers usually, who barely looked at me while they paid for diesel and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. Sometimes a car would pull in with out-of-state plates. Someone who'd taken a wrong turn and looked at me like I was the last person on earth. I'd point them back toward the interstate. They'd leave. And then it would just be me and the hum of the fluorescent lights and the wide, empty highway stretching in both directions like a scar. The station had a routine, and I learned it fast. Check the pumps at 10, restock the cooler at 11. Mop the floor at midnight whether it needed it or not, because the checklist said so, and the owner, Dale, and checked the timestamps on the security cameras. Take inventory at 1. Then nothing. Hours of nothing. I'd sit behind the counter with a book or my phone, watching the occasional pair of headlights slide past on the highway without stopping. Sometimes I'd step outside and stand under the canopy listening to the silence. Not quiet. Silence. The kind where you become aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, and you start to wonder if those sounds belong to you or if something nearby is matching them. It was a Thursday when I first saw the truck. I remember because Thursdays were the deadest nights. Even the truckers seemed to avoid that stretch on Thursdays, like there was some unspoken schedule I wasn't part of. I'd had exactly 1 customer since my shift started. An older woman in a sedan who bought a bottle of water and didn't say a word. And by 2 in the morning, I was deep into a paperback I'd already read twice, just letting my eyes move over familiar words so my brain had something to do besides listen to the lights buzz. I heard it before I saw it. A low rumble. The kind older trucks make when the engine's been running hard for too long. I looked up from the book and saw headlights coming from the south, moving at a steady pace. Not fast, not slow. The kind of speed that suggests purpose. The truck pulled off the highway and into the station lot, tires crunching over the gravel apron before hitting the concrete. It rolled past the pumps and parked at the far edge of the lot, near the air and water station that hadn't worked in years. It was a pickup. Dark. Not black, but something close. The kind of color that looks different depending on the light. Under the neon, it looked like dried blood. The truck was old but maintained. The kind of vehicle someone takes care of out of habit rather than affection. No bumper stickers, no decals. The license plate was there, but from behind the counter I couldn't read it. And something about walking out there to check felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The engine stayed running. That was the first thing that nagged at me. The truck just sat there, idling, headlights on. I could see the exhaust curling up from the tailpipe, catching the neon and turning pale red before dissolving. I waited for the driver to get out. 1 minute, 2, 5. The truck just idled. I've worked enough night shifts to know that people do strange things at gas stations after midnight. Sleep in their cars, argue on the phone, sit in the dark and cry. I'd learned not to intervene unless someone came inside or unless something looked dangerous. So I watched, and I waited, and I went back to my book, glancing up every few paragraphs. At 3:12 a.m., I checked the clock, I don't know why. The headlights shut off. The engine kept running, but the lights died, and the truck became a dark shape at the edge of the lot, half swallowed by the shadow beyond the canopy's reach. I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, not yet, just awareness. The animal part of my brain that knows when it's being watched. Then, at 3:15, the truck pulled out. No headlights. It rolled back onto the highway heading north and accelerated into the dark, and within 30 seconds, the sound of the engine was gone, and there was nothing but silence and the buzz of the neon and my own pulse in my ears. I told myself it was nothing. The next night was Friday, busier than Thursday, relatively speaking. I had maybe 6 or 7 customers before midnight. A guy bought 3 energy drinks and a bag of peanuts and told me about his divorce. A teenager in a hoodie stole a lighter, and I pretended not to notice because confrontation at 1 in the morning in the middle of nowhere wasn't worth the $1.50. Normal stuff. At 2:47 a.m., the truck came back. Same direction, south, same speed, same steady, purposeful approach. It pulled into the lot, rolled past the pumps, and parked in the exact same spot. The exact same spot. The front left tire settled into the same shallow crack in the concrete I'd noticed the night before. The truck sat there, engine running, headlights on, for exactly 28 minutes. Then the headlights cut. 3 minutes later, it pulled out heading north. No lights. I felt cold. Not from the air conditioning, which barely worked. Cold from the inside, from the place where your body knows something before your mind catches up. Saturday night, 2:47. The truck. Same spot, same duration, same exit. I timed it this time, sitting behind the counter with my phone's stopwatch running, my book forgotten on the shelf. 28 minutes with headlights on, 3 minutes dark, then gone. I started paying attention to details. The truck had a dent in the rear bumper, passenger side. A small one. It caused like someone had backed into a post. The tailgate had a scratch along the top edge. The exhaust pipe was slightly crooked, angled to the left. I wrote these things down in the margins of the inventory sheet because I needed proof that I was seeing the same vehicle each time and not losing my mind. On Sunday night, I decided to go outside. I waited until the truck had been parked for about 10 minutes. I put on my jacket, even in Texas the small hours get cold, and stepped out through the side door, the one that opens under the canopy near pump 2. The air smelled like gasoline and wet earth. It had rained earlier and the lot was slick, reflecting the neon in long red smears. I walked toward the truck, not fast. Casual, like I was just doing a lot check, which was technically part of my job, even if I never actually did it, when I got within maybe 30 feet and stopped. The windows were dark, not tinted, and the truck was too old for factory tinting, but dark, like the interior was filled with something that absorbed light. I couldn't see the driver. I couldn't see a silhouette, a shape, the glow of a phone screen, nothing. Just black glass reflecting the neon back at me. I took another step, and the engine revved. Not a lot. Just a slight increase in RPM, barely audible over the buzz of the sign. But it was enough. It was a response. The truck knew I was there, and it was telling me so. I went back inside. I locked the side door. I sat behind the counter. I watched the truck sit there for 18 more minutes, and then the headlights died, and 3 minutes after that, it was gone. And I sat in the empty station listening to my own breathing and wondering why my hands were shaking. Monday. I almost called Dale. Almost told him about the truck. Asked if anyone else had mentioned it, if the day shift guys had seen it. But what would I say? A truck parks in the lot for half an hour every night? That's not a complaint. That's barely an observation. Dale would tell me to offer the driver a coffee and try to make a sale. So I didn't call. The truck came at 2:47. Same as always. But this time, I did something different. I pulled up the security camera feed on the monitor behind the counter. We had 4 cameras, one on each pump island, one on the front door, and one covering the lot. The lot camera was old and the image was grainy, but it was enough. I watched the truck park. I watched it sit there, and then I did something that made my stomach drop. I rewound the footage. I went back to Thursday night, the first night. I found the timestamp, 2:47 a.m., and there it was. The truck pulling in, parking, sitting. But the footage was wrong. The quality was bad, sure, but I could see enough to know that the truck on Thursday's footage and the truck on Monday's live feed were in the same position. Not similar. The same. The angle of the wheels, the distance from the curb, the way the exhaust curled. It was identical. Frame for frame. Like someone had copied and pasted the same clip. I checked Friday, Saturday, Sunday. All identical. Not just the truck. The way the headlights hit the pumps, the pattern of the exhaust, the reflection on the wet concrete. Every night was the same footage. Or the same event. Or I couldn't tell the difference. And I wasn't sure there was one. I closed the feed. I sat in the dark behind the counter and listened to the truck idle outside, and I thought about the way the engine had revved when I got close, and I thought about the black windows, and I thought about how I'd been alone out here for 3 weeks, and maybe that was doing something to me. Maybe the isolation was rotting something in my head and I was seeing patterns and nothing. But then the truck's headlights shut off at exactly 3:15 and it pulled out at exactly 3:18, and I knew the pattern wasn't in my head. The pattern was in the truck, and it was coming back tomorrow. Tuesday morning when my shift ended, I sat in my car in the lot for 20 minutes before turning the key. The sun was coming up, painting the flat land in shades of copper and rust, and the station looked almost normal in the daylight, almost harmless. Just a sad little building on a sad little highway with pumps that needed replacing and a sign that needed letters. I stared at the spot where the truck parked every night and saw nothing. No tire marks, no oil stain, no evidence at all that anything had been there. I drove home to my apartment, a one-bedroom above a laundromat in a town called Ridley, population barely worth counting, and I lay on my mattress with the curtains drawn and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the black windows of the truck and the way the neon light died against them, absorbed like sound in a padded room. I kept thinking about the security footage, how every night was identical, how that wasn't possible. I slept for 3 hours. When I woke up, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called Marcus. Marcus worked the day shift, 7 to 3. He was older than me by about 15 years. The kind of guy who'd done a lot of different jobs and settled on this one because it asked the least of him. We overlapped for about 30 minutes during shift change, but we rarely talked beyond the basics. What needed restocking, whether the card reader was acting up, if Dale had called about anything. He was fine. Normal. Exactly the kind of person I needed to talk to. Hey Marcus, quick question. You ever notice a truck that parks in the lot? Dark pickup, older model, parks near the air station? Silence on the other end. Then, when? Late, around 3 in the morning. Man, I'm out of there by 3 in the afternoon. I wouldn't see anything like that. Right. But on the cameras, you ever scroll back through the overnight footage? Notice anything? Why would I scroll through overnight footage? He said it like I'd asked him if he ever read the dictionary for fun. Fair enough. I thanked him, hung up, and lay back on the mattress. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a hand. I'd never noticed that before. That night I went to work with a plan. A small one, but a plan. I was going to read the license plate. I got to the station at 9:45, 15 minutes early. Marcus was wiping down the counter with the slow, mechanical motion of a man who'd stopped caring about results a long time ago. We did the handoff. He left. I locked the door behind him and stood in the empty store and felt the quiet settle over me like a second skin. The hours crawled. I had 2 customers before midnight, a trucker who bought diesel and a pack of cigarettes, a woman in scrubs who filled up a Honda and looked like she hadn't slept in days. Then nothing. The highway went dark. The world outside the station's neon reach ceased to exist. At 2:40, I positioned myself by the front window with a notepad and a flashlight. I'd angled the interior lights so the store was dimmer than usual, making it easier to see outside. I felt ridiculous, like a kid on a stakeout. But my hands were steady, and my breathing was controlled, and I was going to read that plate. 2:47. Headlights from the south. The truck pulled in like clockwork. Same speed, same arc, same final position with the left front tire settling into that crack in the concrete. The engine idled. The exhaust curled. The headlights pointed at nothing. I waited for 2 minutes. Then I moved. I went out the front door this time, not the side. I walked along the front of the building, staying under the canopy where the light was strongest. I circled wide, approaching the truck from behind and to the right, keeping a line of pumps between us. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The air tasted like gasoline and something else, something faintly metallic, like old pennies or blood on a bitten tongue. I got close enough to see the plate. I raised the flashlight, clicked it on. The plate was blank. Not missing, blank. It was there, bolted to the bumper, a standard Texas plate shape. But the surface was smooth, No numbers, no letters, no registration sticker, just a flat rectangle of metal the color of bone. I moved the flashlight across it, and the light didn't reflect the way it should have. It seemed to sink into the surface, like the metal was drinking it. I wrote nothing on my notepad. I just stood there, flashlight aimed at a plate that shouldn't exist, trying to force the image to make sense. And then I heard something that made every muscle in my body lock. The driver's door opened. Not all the way, just a few inches. I heard the mechanical click of the latch and the faint groan of the hinge, and I saw the door crack open maybe 4 inches, and the interior light that should have come on didn't. The gap between the door and the frame was a stripe of absolute black. Not shadow and black. The kind of dark that looks solid. I didn't see who opened it. I didn't see a hand. The door just opened on its own, or by something I couldn't perceive, and from inside the cab came a sound. Breathing. Slow. Wet. Rhythmic. Not panicked, not labored. Just breathing like someone asleep. Except it was too steady, too precise. Each inhale lasted exactly the same duration as the last. Each exhale matched. It sounded mechanical, like a machine imitating the act of breathing without understanding what breathing was for. I turned around and walked back to the station. I didn't run. Running felt like it would trigger something, like sudden movement near a predator. I walked at a measured pace, went through the front door, locked it, and sat behind the counter. My flashlight was still on. I turned it off. My hands were shaking again. On the security monitor, the truck sat in its spot. The driver's door was closed. I hadn't heard it close. At 3:15, the headlights died. At 3:18, the truck left, and I watched it go. And I realized I'd been holding my breath for so long, my vision was starting to blur at the edges. Wednesday, I almost didn't go in. I sat in my apartment and stared at the wall and thought about calling Dale and quitting. But quitting meant no income, and no income meant losing the apartment. And losing the apartment meant sleeping in my car on the same highway where the truck drove every night. So I went to work. I tried something different. At 2:30, I went into the back room. A small storage area with shelves of inventory and a mop bucket and no windows. I sat on an overturned crate and closed my eyes and told myself that if I wasn't watching, if I wasn't engaging, the truck would come and go and it would be like it never happened. At 2:47, I heard the rumble of the engine through the wall. At 2:48, I heard something else. A knock. Not on the front door, on the back wall. The exterior wall of the storage room, the one that faced the empty lot behind the station where there was nothing but dead grass and darkness. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, firm enough to rattle the shelves. I stopped breathing. 3 more knocks. Same rhythm, same force. Then a pause, then 3 more. Like something was counting. Like something was letting me know that hiding didn't work, that the walls were not a boundary it respected. I came out of the back room and looked through the front window. The truck was in its spot, but it was closer. Not by much, maybe 10 feet, but it had parked closer to the building than it ever had before. The headlights were aimed at the front window now, and the light hit the glass at an angle that turned it into a mirror. I couldn't see out, but whatever was in the truck could see in. I stood in the headlight glare for 23 minutes until they cut off. Then the truck left. Thursday. I checked the cameras again. I went back through every night since my first shift, 3 weeks of footage. The truck appeared on every single recording. Not just the nights I'd noticed it, every night, including the first 2 weeks, when I'd been too absorbed in books and boredom to look outside. It had been coming since before I started paying attention. Maybe since before I started the job. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the timestamps. Each night, the footage showed the truck arriving at 2:47. But when I looked at the file properties of the recordings, the actual data, the creation timestamps for those segments were wrong. Thursday's footage was dated 3 months ago. Friday's was dated 6 weeks in the future. Saturday's had no date at all. The files existed, the footage played, but according to the system, some of these recordings had been made before the events happened, or hadn't been made yet. I closed the monitoring program. I opened it again. The timestamps were normal now, every file dated correctly, as if the system had caught its own mistake and corrected it while I wasn't looking. I started keeping a journal. Not the notepad. A proper journal, a composition book I bought at a dollar store in Ridley. I wrote down everything. The times, the positions, the sounds, the blank plate, the breathing, the knocks. I wrote down what I felt, too, because I was becoming afraid that my own perceptions were unreliable and I needed a record that existed outside my head. Friday night, the truck brought something new. It arrived at 2:47, same as always. But when it parked, I noticed something on the dashboard. A shape, visible through the windshield for the first time. Not the driver. Yes, I still couldn't see anyone behind the wheel. This was on the passenger side of the dash. Small, rectangular. It took me a long time, squinting through the front window with my face nearly pressed against the glass, to figure out what it was. A photograph, propped up against the windshield from the inside. A photograph of something. The distance and the glare made it impossible to see what the photo showed, but I could make out the shape of it. A standard print, maybe 4x6, in a thin frame. It was angled toward the station, toward me. I didn't go outside. At 3:15, the headlights died. At 3:18, the truck left. And when I walked outside afterward to check the spot where it parked, I found something on the ground. A photograph. Face down on the wet concrete. The kind of print you get from a drugstore. Glossy and slightly curled at the edges. I picked it up and turned it over, and the image made my knees go soft. It was the gas station, shot from the parking lot, from roughly where the truck parked. Nighttime, neon lights bleeding red across wet pavement. And in the window of the station, visible through the glass, was a figure, standing behind the counter, looking out. Me. It was me. The image was slightly blurry, and the way photos get when the subject is behind glass and the focus is uncertain. But it was me. Same jacket, same posture, same angle of my head as I stared out at the lot. But the photo was wrong. Not because of the subject, because of the quality. The print looked old. The colors were faded, the edges yellowed, the gloss cracking. This photo looked like it had been taken years ago, maybe decades. I turned it over. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, small, cramped, precise, was a single line. Night 41. I counted backward in my journal. I'd been working at the station for 23 nights. I stared at the number. Night 41. 18 nights from now. A date that hadn't happened yet, written on a photo that looked older than I was, showing me in a place I'd only known for 3 weeks. I put the photo in my journal as I drove home as the sun came up. I sat on the edge of my mattress and looked at the image under the ceiling light and tried to convince myself it was fake, a prank, some elaborate joke by someone with too much time. But the figure in the photo was wearing my jacket, the one I'd bought at a thrift store in Ridley the week before I started the job, the one that had a small tear in the left pocket that I hadn't told anyone about. I looked at the photo, and the figure in the photo looked back at me through old glass and faded ink, and I understood that whatever was happening at the station wasn't random. It wasn't a glitch or a coincidence or a pattern I'd imposed on chaos. It was a schedule, and I was on it. I called Dale on Saturday morning, told him I needed to talk. He sounded annoyed, which was his default state, and said he could meet me at the station at noon. I drove out there in daylight, which felt like visiting a crime scene after the tape comes down. Everything looked smaller, duller. The pumps stood in the sun like rusted sentinels, and the lot where the truck parked was just a patch of stained concrete next to a broken air compressor. Dale was a thick man in his 50s, with a sunburn that never faded, and a habit of looking past you when you talked. He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms while I tried to explain. I didn't mention the truck directly. I'd rehearsed this on the drive over, and I knew that leading with a ghost truck visits every night would get me fired on the spot. Instead, I asked about the position, how long it had been open before I took it, who worked it before me. Dale's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A flicker, like a fish turning beneath dark water. Position's been open a while, he said. Hard to keep people on nights out here. You know how it is. How long is a while? Few months. And the person before me? Kid named Raleigh, college dropout. Lasted about 5 weeks and then stopped showing up. No call, no notice, just gone. He said it like it happened all the time, and maybe in his line of work it did. Before him there was a woman, Sandra something. She did about 6 weeks, same thing, just quit. Did either of them say why? Dale looked at me for the first time since I'd arrived. Really looked at me with a focus that felt invasive. You thinking about quitting? No, just curious. Don't be curious, be on time. That's all I need from you. He left. I stood in the empty station and looked at the spot behind the counter where the figure in the photograph had been standing, where I had been standing, and I counted. Raleigh lasted 5 weeks, about 35 nights. Sandra lasted 6 weeks, about 42. I'd been there 23 nights, and the photograph said, night 41. I drove home and couldn't stop doing math. Raleigh left around night 35. Sandra around night 42. The average was close to 40. Night 41 was close to 40. Whatever the truck was counting down to, the others had felt it coming and run. The question was whether running had helped. I tried to find them. I didn't have last names, but Ridley was small and the internet is vast, and I spent Sunday afternoon searching every combination of Raleigh and Sandra and the station name and the highway number. I found nothing about Raleigh. Nothing at all, which, for a college-age kid in the age of social media, felt less like privacy and more like absence. Sandra was harder to search without a last name, so I gave up and lay on my mattress and stared at the hand-shaped stain on the ceiling and waited for my shift. Sunday night, night 24. The truck came at 2:47. This time there was a second photograph on the dashboard. I could see 2 rectangular shapes propped against the windshield. and when the truck left at 3:18, there were 2 prints on the concrete. The first showed the station from the same angle as before. Me behind the counter. Same jacket, same posture, but the neon sign was different. The R was dead now, along with the E, so it read LOYS. I looked up at the sign above me. All the same letters were still lit. The R was still working. But in the photo it was dark, and the photo looked 30 years old. On the back, night 38. The second photograph was different. It wasn't taken from the lot. It was taken from inside the station, from behind the counter, aimed at the front window. Through the glass, the truck was visible in its usual spot, but the angle was wrong. The photo was taken from the exact position where I stood every night, at the exact height of my eyes, as if someone had been standing in my place, or as if I had taken the photo myself and forgotten. On the back, night 40. I put both photos in the journal. The pages were getting thick, and I flipped back through my notes and noticed something I'd missed. My own handwriting was changing. The early entries were my normal script, loose, slightly slanted, legible. But the recent entries were tighter, more cramped, more precise, starting to look like the handwriting on the backs of the photographs. I put the journal down and didn't pick it up for the rest of the night. Monday, night 25. I was driving to work at 9:30 p.m., the highway empty ahead and behind, my headlights cutting a tunnel through the dark. The radio was playing something I don't remember because at 9:47 I looked in the rear view mirror and the truck was behind me. Not close. Maybe a quarter mile back, its headlights 2 pale points in the dark. But I knew it the way you know a face in a crowd. The shape of the light. The height of the beams. Each is the way it held its distance, matching my speed exactly, never gaining, never falling back. I accelerated. 70, 80. The truck matched. I slowed to 50. The truck matched. I pulled into the station lot and parked and watched the mirror and the truck rolled past on the highway without slowing, heading north, and disappeared 15 minutes early. It had never come before 2:47. The rules were changing. That night the truck arrived at its usual time and parked in its usual spot, and everything was the same as before. Except when it left at 3:18, I noticed something on the security monitor that I had to rewind 3 times to believe. The truck's headlights didn't turn off at 3:15. They were never on. I checked the footage from the beginning of the visit. The truck pulled in at 2:47, parked, and sat there. No headlights. And the lot was lit only by the neon and the canopy lights. But I'd seen headlights. I had stood in the glare of them. I had watched them reflect off the wet concrete. I had squinted against their brightness for 28 minutes. The camera saw a dark truck in a dim lot. I saw a truck with headlights so bright they turned the window into a mirror. One of us was wrong. And I was no longer sure it was the camera. Tuesday I brought someone with me. A guy named Chris from the laundromat downstairs. The kind of person who'd agree to anything if you bought him a 6-pack. I told him I needed company on the shift, that the isolation was getting to me. He shrugged and said sure, and spent the first 3 hours sitting in the folding chair by the cooler, drinking beer and talking about his ex-girlfriend. I wasn't listening, and I was watching the clock. At 2:45, I told Chris to look outside. Watch the lot. Tell me if he saw anything. 2:47. Nothing happened. Chris looked at me like I was losing it. What am I looking for, man? A truck, A dark pickup. There's nothing out there. I looked at the lot through the front window. He was right. The lot was empty. The usual spot was vacant. The air compressor stood alone in the dark. No truck, no headlights, no exhaust, nothing. I walked to the security monitor. The camera showed the lot. Empty. Then I looked at the reflection in the glass door of the beer cooler, and in the warped, curved surface of the glass, distorted by condensation and the angle of the light, I saw it. The truck, in its spot. Headlights on. A dark shape behind the wheel that might have been a figure or might have been nothing. It was there in the reflection, but not in reality, like it existed on the other side of a surface that only I could see through. I looked back at the lot. Empty. I looked at the cooler glass. The truck. "You okay?" Chris asked. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I'm fine." He left at midnight the next night, said the drive wasn't worth it. I didn't ask him back. He hadn't seen anything, and his presence had made the truck invisible but hadn't made it gone. It was still there. I just couldn't prove it to anyone but myself. Wednesday, night 27. 3 photographs on the concrete when the truck left. Night 39. The station from outside. Me at the counter. But in this one, my hand was raised, pressed flat against the window glass from the inside, like I was trying to touch something on the other side. I didn't remember doing that, and I didn't think I'd ever done that. Night 40. The station from inside. The truck through the window. But the interior of the station was wrong. The shelves were empty, the lights were dimmer, and there was something on the floor near the counter. A dark shape. A stain. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was large, and it was the color of old rust. Night 41. This one was different from all the others. It wasn't taken at the station. It was taken in my apartment. The photo showed my bedroom, my mattress, my ceiling with the hand-shaped water stain. The angle was from the corner near the window looking down at the bed, as if someone had been standing in my room while I slept. And on the bed, visible under the thin sheet, was a shape. A body. My body, presumably. It's though the sheet covered everything and the image was too old and faded to be certain. On the back, in that cramped handwriting that was starting to look like mine, Night 41. Finished. Finished. I sat on the floor of the station with the 3 photographs spread in front of me, and I tried to think clearly. Night 41 was 14 nights away. The photos were showing me a sequence, each one a step closer to whatever finished meant. The previous employees had left before reaching that number. Raleigh at 35. Sandra at approximately 42. But maybe she'd miscounted, or maybe the number wasn't fixed, or maybe it was different for each person. But they'd left. They'd felt it coming and they'd run. I could run. The thought hit me like cold water. I could quit. Tonight. Walk out, drive to Ridley, pack a bag, and drive until the highway ended. I didn't own anything I couldn't leave behind. I didn't owe Dale or the station or the job anything that mattered more than whatever was waiting on night 41. I stood up. I put the photos in the journal. I reached for my jacket. The lights went out. Not the neon days that stayed on outside, buzzing its insect drone. The interior lights, the fluorescence in the ceiling, the display lights in the coolers, the little green power indicator on the register. All of it dead at once. The station plunged into a darkness cut only by the red glow filtering through the windows from the sign outside. I couldn't see the door. I knew where it was. 15 feet to my left, past the chip rack and the magazine stand. But in the dark, the distances felt wrong. The geometry of the room shifted. And when I took a step, my foot hit something that shouldn't have been there. Something solid. Something that moved when I touched it, sliding across the floor with a wet, heavy sound. I got my phone out, turned on the flashlight, pointed it down. A boot, a work boot, old and cracked, sitting in the middle of the floor where nothing had been a minute ago. It was filled with something dark. I didn't look closely enough to determine what. I didn't need to. The smell told me. Copper and rot and something sweet underneath, like flowers left in a vase until the water turns to slime. The lights came back on, all at once, the fluorescent slamming to full brightness with a sound like a gasp. I blinked against the glare and looked down. The boot was gone. The floor was clean. The station looked exactly as it had before, every shelf in place, and every light working, the register humming its low electronic tone. On the counter, where I hadn't left it, was another photograph. I picked it up. It showed the station interior from above, as if taken from the ceiling. The floor was visible, and on the floor was a shape. A person lying face down, arms at their sides. Not me. The build was wrong, thicker, shorter. They were wearing a work shirt with a name patch I couldn't quite read. The photo was older than the others, the colors almost entirely bleached, the image more ghost than photograph. I turned it over. Night 41. Before you. Before me. Someone else had reached night 41. Someone else had been finished. I put the photo with the others, and I stood behind the counter and I looked out at the empty lot, and I understood something that I'd been refusing to understand. I wasn't going to run. Not because I was brave. Not because I was curious. Because I'd already seen the photographs. Night 38, night 39, night 40, night 41. In every single one, I was still at the station, still behind the counter, still there. Whatever choice I thought I had, the photos had already been taken. The future had already been printed, faded, aged, and delivered to me on wet concrete. The truck knew I'd stay. It had always known. I had 14 nights left. The nights between 27 and 37 passed in a blur that felt more like erosion than time. Each shift was identical. The truck at 2:47. The photographs accumulating. The journal filling with handwriting that looked less like mine each day. I stopped reading the backs of the photos. I already knew what they said, and the numbers were counting forward, and I was being carried along like a body in a current, aware of the direction but powerless against it. I stopped sleeping properly. Not insomnia. Something worse. I'd lie on the mattress and close my eyes and feel like I was still at the station, standing behind the counter, looking out at the lot. I could hear the neon buzz. I could smell the gasoline. When I opened my eyes, I was in my apartment, but the transition felt less like waking and more like switching channels. Both places were real. I just wasn't sure which one I was actually in. Night 35. The night Raleigh had quit. I thought about him while I stood behind the counter and watched the truck idle in its spot. Had he stood here and felt this same weight? Had he seen his own face in photographs that shouldn't exist? Had he run, and had running saved him? I thought about the search I'd done, how I'd found nothing, no trace of him anywhere, and I wondered if quit was the right word for what Raleigh had done on his 35th night, or if something else had happened that Dale either didn't know about or chose not to describe. The truck left at 3:18. I walked outside. One photograph on the concrete. It showed the highway, empty. Shot from the shoulder, looking south toward the station, which was a distant smear of red neon on the horizon. The road was wet. The sky was black. And on the highway, halfway between the camera and the station, was a figure, walking. Away from the station toward the camera, face obscured by distance and darkness. The figure's posture was wrong, stiff, mechanical, like someone walking for the first time. Or like someone who'd forgotten what walking felt like and was imitating it from memory. On the back, night 35. Raleigh. I held the photo under the canopy light and stared at the figure on the highway and tried to see a face. There was nothing. Just a shape, walking in the dark, heading in the direction the truck always went. North. Night 38. I arrived at the station and the R in the sign was dead. I stood in the lot and stared up at it. LOYs. Exactly like the photograph. The one that had been taken or printed or manifested weeks ago, showing a future that was now the present. I went inside and called Dale, told him the sign had a dead letter. He said he'd send someone to fix it. He never did. That night the truck came and I stood behind the counter and I felt something I hadn't felt before. Calm. And not peace, calm. The kind of calm that comes when you stop fighting a current and let it take you. I watched the truck and the truck watched me and the dead letter buzzed in the sign above and I thought, 3 more nights. Night 39, 2:47. The truck parked. Headlights on, it off, or the version of headlights that only I could see. The light that existed in a frequency the cameras couldn't capture and other people couldn't perceive. I stood at the counter and looked out at the lot and I felt my hand rise. I didn't tell it to. I watched it like it belonged to someone else. My right hand lifting from the counter, reaching forward, pressing flat against the window glass. The glass was cold. I could feel the vibration of the neon through it. A faint tremor that ran up my arm and into my teeth. I stood there with my palm against the window, fingers spread, and I looked past my own hand at the truck, and for the first time I saw something move inside the cab. Not the door, not the breathing. Something behind the windshield in the driver's seat shifted. A shape, darker than the darkness around it, leaning forward, toward the glass, toward me. Like it was pressing its own hand against the windshield from the inside, mirroring my gesture, reaching for me through 2 layers of glass and 50 feet of wet concrete. I couldn't pull my hand away. I stood there for 11 minutes with my palm against the window and the shape in the truck leaning toward me, and I felt something pass between us. Not information, not communication, something older, something like recognition. All with the way you feel when you look at a photograph of yourself as a child, and for one disorienting moment, you don't recognize the face, but you know with absolute certainty that it's you. The headlights died. The truck left. I peeled my hand from the glass, and there was a mark where my palm had been, not condensation. A mark in the glass itself, like my handprint had been etched into the surface. I touched it. It was smooth, slightly warm, and it didn't fade. Night 40. I arrived at the station and something was different. The shelves were wrong. Not empty, wrong. The products were there, the chips and the candy bars and the motor oil, but they were arranged differently. Older brands? packaging I didn't recognize. A cigarette display behind the counter showed brands that hadn't been sold in decades, and the cooler hummed at a different pitch. The fluorescent lights had a yellow tint they'd never had before, like the bulbs had aged 20 years since my last shift. I checked the clock. It was 10:07 p.m. The clock was analog. It had been digital yesterday. I walked through the station and everything was almost right, but nothing was exactly right. The mop in the back room had a wooden handle instead of aluminum. The inventory sheets on the clipboard were handwritten, not printed. The calendar on the wall said 1997. I stood behind the counter and looked out the window at the lot, and the lot was the same. The pumps were the same models. The canopy was the same shape. The neon sign buzzed LOYs in the same broken script. But through the window, past the pumps, the highway was empty in a way that felt permanent. Not just quiet, extinct. It's like no car had driven on it in years. Like the road existed, but the world that used it didn't. At 2:47, the truck pulled in. But it didn't come from the highway. It was already there. One moment, the lot was empty. The next, the truck was in its spot, engine idling, headlights on, as if it had always been there and my eyes had just decided to acknowledge it. No approach, no arrival, just presence. The driver's door opened, all the way this time. It swung wide and the interior light, which had never worked before, came on, a weak yellow glow that made the cab look like the inside of a lantern. I saw the bench seat, cracked vinyl, a steering wheel wrapped in electrical tape. I saw the dashboard dusty with a crack running across it like a dry riverbed. I saw the driver. He was sitting in the seat, both hands on the wheel. And he was me, not a version of me, not someone who looked like me. Me. Same face, same jacket with the torn pocket, same posture, same angle of the head, same way I hold my shoulders when I'm tired. He was staring straight ahead, through the windshield, at the station window, at the counter, at the spot where I was standing. His eyes were open, but they weren't looking. They were fixed. Glassy, like the eyes in the photographs. Present, but preserved. A living image of a person who wasn't alive in any way that mattered. His mouth moved. I couldn't hear what he said through the glass in the distance, but I could read the shape of the words, 3 syllables, over and over. 41. I don't know how long I stood there. The clock on the wall had stopped. The hum of the cooler had stopped. The neon outside had stopped buzzing, and the only sound was the truck's engine and the faint, wet rhythm of the figure's mouth, shaping the number again and again. And I stood behind the counter with my hand on the glass. It had risen again, pressed flat against the window without my permission. And I watched myself sit in the truck and say the number, and I understood. The truck didn't have a driver. It had a passenger, a collected thing, a previous version of someone who'd stood where I was standing and watched the countdown reach 0 and been finished. Raleigh, Sandra, the figure in the work shirt from the old photograph. All of them, finished, folded into the truck like photographs into a journal. And now it was my turn. Night 41 was tomorrow, and the version of me in the truck was what I would become. Not dead, not gone, collected, filed. I am put away in the dark cab with the cracked vinyl and the blank plate and the engine that never stopped running. The door closed. The interior light died. The headlights cut. The truck sat in the dark for 3 minutes, and then it pulled away, and this time it didn't go north or south. It simply wasn't there anymore. One moment it existed, and the next it was a memory, and the station shifted around me. The shelves restocking themselves with modern products, the digital clock reappearing on the wall, the calendar flipping forward to the correct year, and I was standing in the normal station on the normal highway on a normal night with one shift left. I went home. I sat on my mattress. I looked at the journal, thick with photographs, and I opened it to the last page I'd written on, and I saw that the handwriting was no longer mine. It was the truck's handwriting. Small, cramped, precise. And the words on the page were not words I remembered writing. You don't have to come back, but you will. They always do. You already know why. You've seen the photographs. You know where you'll be standing. You know what night it is. You've always known. The truck is patient. The truck has always been here. Before the station. Before the highway. Before the road was paved. And the land was flat. And the neon was invented to light the dark. The truck was here. Waiting. Idling. Running on something older than gasoline. Night 41 is not an ending. It's a transfer. You step out of the station and into the cab, and the engine keeps running, and the next one starts their count. And that's all. That's the whole thing. A schedule, a route, a collection. You're already in the truck. Yeah, Kick, you just haven't sat down yet. I closed the journal. I'm writing this from the station. It's night 41. The clock says 2:38 a.m. I have 9 minutes. The lot is empty, but I can hear the engine already, distant, low, coming from every direction and no direction, like a sound that exists inside the pavement itself. I'm standing behind the counter. My hand is on the glass. I didn't put it there. The photographs are spread on the counter in front of me. Every one of them shows tonight. Every one of them shows me here, exactly like this. Hand on glass, eyes on the lot, waiting. The photos are old. The photos are new. The photos haven't been taken yet. It doesn't matter. They're all the same image. The neon buzzes, LOYs. The canopy light flickers. The highway is empty. I can see headlights now. Not from the south. Not from anywhere. They're just appearing 2 pale points of light in the lot, like eyes opening in a dark room. The engine sound is louder, closer. The truck is forming in its spot the way ice forms on a window. Slowly, then all at once, a shape assembling itself from the dark. I should leave. I know I should leave. But my hand is on the glass, and my feet won't move, and the journal is open on the counter, and the last line of the last page, in handwriting that is mine, and isn't mine, and has always been mine, says, "Welcome back. The truck is here. The door is opening."